Everyone in town believed Paige's story. She said Elena had stolen from their grandmother, drained the accounts, and betrayed the family. But numbers do not gossip. Numbers do not cry in court. Numbers do not lie to protect greedy people. While Paige spread rumors, Elena quietly followed the money. Old ledgers, hidden records, unpaid taxes, secret loans, and a trust built with perfect precision. What looked like a stolen inheritance was actually a trap, and the more Paige tried to prove Elena was a thief, the closer she came to exposing herself.
Call me Elena Hart, 31. It takes 3 seconds for a lie to cross a desk. I was counting, sitting in a cold deposition room. Staring at my cousin Paige, she wore a borrowed silk blouse, lying under oath with the ease of someone who never faced a consequence. She swore she saw our grandmother sign a document meant to steal my inheritance. Paige smiled. She thought she won. She thought I was still that quiet girl she pushed around. She had no clue I spent months building a legal trap she could never escape. Before I show you what I pulled from my bag to shatter her smug look, please like and subscribe to Family Drama. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read them all. Now, let us jump back 3 months to the day my cousin signed her own financial death warrant. At a Tuesday, 9:14 in the morning. We sat in the lobby of Julian Stone, an estate attorney with an office overlooking the valley. Paige and my Aunt Karen were already there, arguing over whether to tear out Grandma Sylvia's original floors or just paint over them. My brother Leo sat beside me, staring at his shoes. I stayed still, watching the clock. Stone finally opened his door. As Paige and Karen brushed past him to grab the best chairs, Stone put a hand on my arm. He stopped me in the hall, eyes on his notes. He leaned in, whispering, "Don't react. There is a second document." I walked in and took the last seat. Stone sat behind his desk, opened a leather folder, and began to read Sylvia Miller's last will and testament. The terms were blunt. Sylvia left the historic estate on Pine Street, the classic cars, and all assets to her eldest granddaughter, Paige. Paige let out a gasp, hugged Karen, and smirked at me. She was always the golden child, lavish trips, jewellery, gifts. I was the one who managed the estate, handled health records, and kept the ledgers. Now, she had the crown jewels. Stone waited for the noise to die down. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers, and slid them toward Paige. "These are the administrative obligations," he said. "Standard assumption of liability. I need your signature to transfer the deed." Paige never read the first page. She never flipped to the second. She grabbed the pen and signed her name with a flourish. She figured she was a millionaire. She held all the cards. I watched Stone fold his hands, eyes locked on me. Not Paige. She shoved the paperwork back and turned to me, chin raised. "Sorry, Elena. Grandma always knew who enjoyed the finer things." I stood up. I smoothed my jacket, caught her eye, and delivered the only words I would speak that day. "Congratulations, Paige. Ever let an arrogant person dig their own grave just because you read the fine print? Tell me in the comments." We left Stone's office and headed to the parking garage in silence. The quiet between my brother Leo and me was heavy. Paige and Karen stayed behind to ask the receptionist for luxury real estate referrals. They were spending money they had not even touched yet. Walking to my car, the concrete brought back a memory. 19 years ago, at Sylvia's kitchen table, I was 12. A Tuesday in autumn, the house smelled like dried lavender. I had a blue plastic pill organizer on the oak table, sorting daily medications, white pills for blood pressure, yellow for cholesterol. It was my weekly routine. Paige was 14. She was supposed to be sweeping. Instead, I watched her walk into the kitchen, footsteps silent. She slipped her hand into Sylvia's brown leather purse, which rested on the chair. Paige pulled out a crisp $50 bill, folded it, and walked out the back door. Sylvia sat at the head of the table, sipping tea and reading the paper. She did not yell. She simply set her cup down, locked eyes with me, and clicked her silver pen. One sharp click in the quiet kitchen. Then she returned to her newspaper. That was the moment I understood my grandmother. Sylvia never missed a deficit. She just let the debt accumulate. I once asked her why she let Paige take things without consequence. She handed me receipts to organize. Logistics is just the art of putting things where they belong. Elena, she said, people are no different. You let them show you where they belong first. Sylvia's wisdom echoed as I drove away from the law office. I could not dwell on Paige's hollow victory. The inheritance meant my role managing the mountain retreat was officially over. I had run that property for 7 years. I handled the winterization, roof repairs, taxes, and the emergency plumbing calls at 2 a.m. Paige only visited the retreat to host ski weekends, leaving trash for me to clean. By Thursday, I was at the cabin, packing files into boxes. The air in the canyon was thin, smelling of pine. My brother Leo was there. Taping boxes, his wife, Nia, was there too. Nia is a senior paralegal at a corporate firm downtown. She reads dense contracts for a living and reads people's even faster. She is a sharp, brilliant woman who does not waste words or tolerate fools. While Leo worried about how Aunt Karen would treat us now that Paige controlled the assets, Nia stacked my ledgers into neat columns. Let them talk. Leo, Nia said. She slid the packing tape across the floor. Talk is cheap, documentation is expensive. The gravel outside crunched. A luxury sport utility vehicle pulled up to the porch. Paige stepped out, wearing white winter boots that had never touched mud. Karen followed, holding a clipboard like a shield. They stormed through the front door without knocking. You need to be out by noon, Paige said. No hello, no offer to help. She looked at the files Nia was organizing and wrinkled her nose. I am listing this place by the end of the month. The market is hot, and I am not paying for seasonal maintenance. I did not argue. I zipped my bag shut. I have the service records for the furnace and the plow driver S contact info on the counter. You need to call him before November, or he drops you from the route. Paige waved her hand. I will hire a management company. Keys. Elena, hand them over, all of them. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the heavy silver keyring. 6 keys. I handed the ring to her. Paige held it to the light, sifting through the brass and steel. She paused at the oldest key on the ring. It was heavy, tarnished with a complex. Strange bit. It did not match any lock on the property. Sylvia had kept it on that ring for decades. What is this? Paige asked. I do not know, I said. It was always on the ring. Paige scoffed. She worked the metal off the loop and tossed the rest into her bag. She held the vintage key with pure distaste, holding it by the edge as if it might stain her manicure. Keep the garbage, she sneered, throwing the key directly at my chest. It missed. Nia stepped forward and caught the key mid-air. Her reflexes were honed from years of catching heavy case files. Nia opened her palm, studying the tarnished metal. She ran her thumb over the deep grooves. Her eyes narrowed. She did not hand it back. Aunt Brenda marched into the living room, heels clicking sharply. She pointed a finger at me. You have leeched off this family long enough, Elena, she snapped. Her voice rang off the ceilings. You hid in Karen's shadow, playing the sweet helper, just waiting for a handout. You are a parasite. The free ride is done. Pack your junk and get off my daughter S property. I studied Brenda, then I looked at Paige, who wore that same hollow grin from the office earlier. I stayed silent. I did not fight back. I grabbed the last box. Leo hauled the others. Nia brushed past Paige without a word, her shoulder clipping Paige's expensive coat. We hit the freezing mountain air and stuffed the boxes into my car. As Leo slammed the trunk, Nia turned. She opened her palm, showing the tarnished key. She stared at me, her gaze cutting through the fog. That is not a door key, Elena, Nia said, precise and cold. The teeth are too short. The barrel is thick and hollow. I see these in estate sales for old homes. It belongs to a vintage cedar trunk. I stared at the dark metal in her hand. Karen had a massive antique trunk at the foot of her bed in the Pine Street house, the one Paige just inherited. The place Paige is currently rekeying. Karen kept that trunk locked my entire life. She never opened it for anyone. Brenda called me a parasite, but she had no clue what Paige just tossed away. The drive down the canyon was quiet. I watched snowy pines blur past. My phone buzzed. A secure email from Marcus Vane's office. No subject line, just one sentence. telling me to return alone through the back entrance at 1 o'clock sharp. The trap was set. I followed the email exactly. I parked 3 blocks away in a public lot. I walked to the high-rise housing, the Vane law firm, slipping through the alley behind the bank. The rear entrance was a plain steel door meant for deliveries. At 1 o'clock, I hit the faded brass buzzer. The lock clicked open. I skipped the lobby and took the freight elevator to the 14th floor. Vane stood at the end of the hall. He was not behind his desk today. He led me to a small table near a corner window looking over the valley. 2 files sat on the desk, one thin, one thick. "Sit, Josie. No pity. We are strictly business now." The grieving lawyer act was over. Replaced by a cold, sharp strategist. Vane had managed my grandmother's affairs for decades. He handled the plant sale back in the 90s and knew her better than anyone. He tapped the thin file. "This is the will Chloe signed today. The public version. It leaves the mansion, the cars, and the accounts to her." He slid the thick folder forward. "This is the secret trust your grandmother drafted 3 years ago. You are the sole beneficiary. Chloe is left out entirely." I scanned the binder. It was dense, but page 2 had the summary. Sarah had slowly moved her wealth into hidden funds over a decade. The total was $4.2 million. My lungs seized. I read it twice, then looked at Vane. Why leave her the house? Why the split? Vane leaned in. Because that house is a sinking ship. Sarah took out a massive mortgage years ago. She used the cars for private loans and stopped paying property taxes. Chloe just inherited $800,000 in debt. I ran the numbers. Sarah had gutted the visible assets to fund the trust, leaving a financial landmine for Chloe. She took the bait the second she signed. She inherited every single debt. Vane handed me an envelope. "Evelyn wanted you to have this when you knew the truth," he said. I broke the seal. Inside was heavy paper. Sarah's handwriting. "Logistics is about placing things where they belong. People are the same. You let them show you their nature." She had watched Chloe and Brenda's greed for years. She crafted this trap so perfectly they walked right into it, blinded by their own hunger. While I sat in that office, Chloe was staging a victory lap. My brother Leo sent a clip of her social media. She was at a posh rooftop brunch in downtown Salt Lake. Wearing a dress she bought on credit, she was laughing, sipping $200 champagne. Brenda sat nearby, snapping photos. Chloe looked at the camera, her eyes bright with hollow triumph. She toasted to her new legacy. The comments poured in with hearts from people fooled by her fake life. She was celebrating her climb to the top while drowning in debt. I turned my phone over. The contrast was sickening. I looked at Vane. How soon will she realise? He checked his watch. The first default notice hits in 10 days. Then the tax office will step in. Banks do not care about her online presence. They want their money. Once she finds out the cash is gone, she will come hunting for you. I grabbed the folder, its weight feeling like armour. "What happens then?" I asked. Vane turned. "She will drop the grieving act and become a desperate debtor. Desperate people play dirty. She will try to break the trust. You must secure your defences before the first bank letter hits her door." I called my cousin Maya immediately. I explained the trap. Maya didn't blink. She processed the info like a pro. "Chloe just posted an update," she said. "She is hiring locksmiths to change the house keys at 4. I checked the time. 2:15. We had barely over an hour to get there. I told Maya to meet me at Grandma Claire's old Victorian place. From the street it looked grand, up close. The paint was peeling and the driveway was cracked. Chloe never noticed the decay, only the status. I used my key to get us in. Maya arrived minutes later. We went to the master suite. It was freezing, smelling of mothballs and floor wax. At the foot of the bed sat a cedar chest. Maya pulled an old key from her pocket. She knelt, jamming it into the lock. It groaned and clicked open. I lifted the lid. The room filled with the scent of cedar and lilac perfume. The chest was packed with blankets. Maya cleared them out and pulled a tape measure from her bag. "There is a 3-inch gap," she noted. She felt the bottom, pressing the corners. She found a catch near the right bracket. The base plate shifted, and we lifted the false floor. Inside was a ledger with a faded navy cover. I grabbed it. The pages were filled with Grandma's handwriting, a brutal list of dates, incidents, and the reality behind every lie. I flipped through 4 years of time-stamped evidence. I found an entry. Rita demanded $6,000 for a seminar. Reality, a luxury trip to Cabo. I turned the page. Rita stole an emerald brooch, claiming it was lost. Reality, appraised at $4,500. I saw her wearing it in a photo later. Every theft was documented. Grandma hadn't just watched, she had built a case. This ledger was the ultimate evidence. We grabbed it, restuffed the chest, and cleared out by 3:40. 20 minutes later, the locksmith secured a house full of debt, while Maya and I digitized the pages. Rita was still busy playing queen, armed with a fake sense of destiny. Rita drove her luxury SUV to a branch of First Fidelity in downtown Seattle. I didn't need to guess how it went. A bystander filmed the scene, and Leo sent it to our group chat. Rita sat across from a loan officer, looking like the heiress she pretended to be. She slid her papers over, asking for a $500,000 credit line. The banker checked her file. His face changed when he saw the liens on the house. He turned his monitor toward her. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "I cannot approve credit. The property is heavily leveraged." Rita laughed. "That is impossible," she snapped. "The house is paid off," she insisted. The banker shook his head. "I am looking at the records. A balloon mortgage is due in 45 days, plus years of unpaid taxes. You are underwater." The camera zoomed in as Rita's face crumbled. She stared at the screen, realizing the truth. "You are lying," she screamed. Her voice went shrill. "Grandma was wealthy. You are looking at the wrong file, I assure you." "These are the filings," the banker said, deadpan. "If you inherited the estate, you inherited the debt. See a lawyer." Rita stood, shoving her chair back. She slammed her hands on the desk, demanding the manager. Her shouting drawing stares from the entire lobby. That video caught the whole meltdown. Sarah and I rewatched it twice. As Rita's screaming faded, I slammed my laptop shut. The room felt suffocating. The clock was ticking, but we had far less time than expected. Rita was broke and desperate. She'd burn anyone to stay afloat. Extortion was coming. And I had the ledger ready, but that viral clip had already cornered her. She was flat broke, holding a deed the bank would grab within weeks. A rational person files for bankruptcy. Rita wasn't rational. She was a narcissist without an audience. She needed a scapegoat and cash to fund a legal war. She found her mark at Aunt Brenda's place, south of the city. Rita drove there early the next morning. I heard later from a neighbor about the screaming. Rita didn't ask for help, she performed a tragedy. She sobbed on the couch, spinning lies about her stolen fortune. She convinced her mom that hiring a shark attorney was the only way to save the family name. Brenda, blinded by the act, risked everything. 3 days later, she signed a second mortgage, handing over $100,000 for fees. With the lawyer hired, Rita went on the offensive. Grandfather was a titan, and Grandma was a charity icon. Rita weaponized their legacy. She hit church in dark glasses. Looking somber while whispering poison, she posted cryptic rants about betrayal and elder abuse. Her story was consistent. She claimed Grandma wanted her to have the cash, but that ID embezzled it while acting as caregiver. I became a total outcast. Friends went silent. Even the baker wouldn't look at me. Leo wanted to fight back. Nia stopped him. Never interrupt an enemy making a mistake. She knew the silence was phase 1. The next move would be extortion. I manage logistics for a regional distributor. It is loud, chaotic work. One rainy Thursday, I stepped out of my office. A sleek SUV sat parked illegally in our loading zone. Rita waited there, rocking a trench coat and a designer bag. Evelyn S. money, for sure. She didn't look broke, she looked dangerous. I gripped my clipboard. "We need to talk," she snapped. Her voice cut right through the warehouse hum. "You are in a loading zone," I said. "Move it." She closed the distance, smelling of overpowering perfume. The grieving granddaughter act was dead. A smirk twisted her face. "I know about the accounts, Josie. You think I believe Grandma burned through millions? You stole my inheritance. I stared back, pulse steady. I didn't steal a cent. Evelyn gave you exactly what you earned. Rita laughed, cold and sharp. Transfer 50,000 by Monday, or I tell the whole city you are a thief. We can settle this, she insisted. I just stared. You are trying to extort me, she narrowed her eyes. I am saving her legacy if you refuse. I will ruin your career. You will lose everything. Pay up or prepare for war. Once, I might have cracked, but Evelyn taught me better. Logistics is all about order. Rita's threats meant nothing. Not a dime, I said. She flushed. You are making a massive mistake. Move the car. Rita, I have trucks coming. I locked the door and watched her storm off, tires screeching. I finished my shift, logged the inventory, and drove home. Nia had left files on the counter. I grabbed coffee and opened my laptop. I didn't cry over lost friends. I didn't fear for my job. I opened a spreadsheet. Column 1, public lies. Column 2, reality. I pulled up her social media and started documenting. She claimed I stole 30,000 last winter. I checked Evelyn S. Blue Ledger. There it was in Grandma S. cursive. Rita had taken that money to cover her own tax debt. 4 hours of cross-referencing. I built a web of facts. Every lie became ammunition. I wasn't fighting in the court of public opinion. I was going to let her dig her own hole. I would hand the shovel to a judge. If you have been the villain in a liaress story, hit subscribe. Let me show you how silence wins. Rita was out of moves. She realized bullying wouldn't work, so she crossed the line. She drafted a new document to force my hand. The silence lasted exactly 96 hours. She vanished after our confrontation. No posts, no gossip. Leo thought she was gone. I knew better. In logistics, a sudden stop never means the end. It means the machine is shifting out of sight. A desperate person finds a heavier weapon. That weapon hit Tuesday. My phone buzzed at the desk. It was Thomas Gable, the attorney. I stepped away from the forklifts. He sounded like a pilot reporting an engine failure. We have a situation. Josie, Rita just filed an emergency motion in probate court. What document? An amendment to the trust, he said. Handwritten, signed by your grandmother a week before she died. It names Rita as a co-trustee with access to all cash. My breath hitched. That is a forgery. Evelyn built that trust to stop her. She would never sign that, Gable sighed. I believe you, but the court treats filings as real until proven otherwise. It had a signature and a notary seal. The judge granted a preliminary injunction. The trust is frozen, Josie. All 4.2 million is locked in escrow. You cannot touch a cent. The reality hit me hard. It was a tactical strike. She knew I lived on a salary. By freezing the trust, she cut my supply lines. I had no war chest. I couldn't pay Gable S. fees. She was funding her lawyer with equity from Brendes home. She wanted to starve me out. She expected me to settle just to stop the bleeding. I ended the call and finished my shift on autopilot. Driving home, the sky was a bruised purple. Leo and Nia were waiting. Nia, a paralegal, had already pulled the court filing. High-resolution copies were spread across the island. Leo was pacing, clearly anxious. How did she do this? He asked. The signature is perfect. It looks just like Grandma S. If the judge buys this, she walks away with half the fortune. She wins. I stared at the sheets. Blue ink, flowing cursive, a fake change of heart. And there, at the bottom, was Evelyn S.'s signature next to the notary stamp. It was terrifyingly real. The spacing, the tremors, it was all her. For a second, I felt sick. Did Rita force her to sign a blank page? Nia didn't panic. She pulled up a stool. She fished her glasses from her purse and slid them on. Nia reviews legal docs like a gemologist checking a diamond. She ignores the glitter and hunts for microscopic fractures. Leo, stop pacing, she said softly without looking up. Panic is useless. Let me read. The room went still. Just the fridge humming and paper rustling as Nia flipped the pages. She studied the document for 10 solid minutes. She ignored the signature at the bottom and focused on the body paragraphs. Nia tapped the first page. Josie. Do you remember when Evelyn broke her wrist? The question triggered a childhood memory. I nodded. 1998. She slipped on black ice and fractured her right radius. Nia leaned back. The bones set poorly. I recall her medical proxy. Arthritis settled in, severely limiting her range of motion. It ruined her biomechanics. How did that affect her handwriting? I pictured the blue ledger in the cedar chest, those thousands of lists and cards. She couldn't bend her wrist inward, I replied. To manage the stiffness, she had to angle the paper. It gave her cursive a strict 15-degree rightward slant. She never wrote a perfectly vertical line after that. Nia slid the forgery toward me. Look at the lowercase t in the word estate, she instructed. I leaned in. The vertical line of that T was perfectly straight, perpendicular to the notebook lines. The crossbar was drawn with rigid precision. I scanned the rest. Every single T and L stood upright like stiff soldiers. They missed that distinct 15-degree slant defined by Evelyn S. hand. Nia pulled off her glasses. Forgery is cognitive overload, she explained. When an amateur mimics handwriting, they pour all their focus into the signature. They practice until the loops look right. But when they forge 2 full pages, the brain tires. Muscle memory kicks in. They stop maintaining the disguise on the boring letters. Rita tried so hard to nail the name that she forgot how Evelyn actually wrote. The knot in my stomach turned to cold clarity. Rita never forced Evelyn to sign anything. She wrote the whole thing herself. "We can prove it is fake," Leo said. "We just show this to the judge. The letters are the proof. It is not that simple." Nia cautioned, "This is the legal system, not a puzzle. Law requires expert testimony to junk a sworn document. We need an analyst, a deposition for that notary, and months of grueling discovery, all while the trust stays frozen." Rita knew this. She didn't need a perfect forgery, just one good enough to lock the funds. She weaponized probate court, betting I would crumble under legal fees while she played victim. She wanted me trapped. I stared at the fake document. Rita expected me to shrink, but logistics is about finding the bottleneck and clearing the path. If she wanted to play dirty, I was ready. I turned to Nia and Leo. "We aren't waiting for an expert. We are building a war room. We map every move she has made since the will reading. Tomorrow, she gets some bait. Time to test her." Monday morning, my apartment became a command center. Furniture moved out, and 3 massive whiteboards from my warehouse moved in. Logistics demands visual data. You cannot fix a supply chain if you cannot see the obstacles. You cannot break a lie if you cannot chart the contradictions. We mapped my grandmother's final 3 years. Nia pinned ledger pages on the left for a truth baseline. We mapped Rita's social media on the right. The center board held the forged trust. Rita had frozen the funds, but her fancy lawyer was draining her bank account. The equity she yanked from Aunt Brenda's house would vanish under the pressure of a legal battle. A desperate enemy makes mistakes. I planned to trigger one. I set a manila folder on the kitchen island and grabbed a thick marker, in bold letters. I wrote Evelyn Caldwell offshore accounts, routing data on the cover. I left it near my sliding patio door. My ground floor unit made it easy to spot through the blinds, to look authentic. I stuffed the folder with 40 pages of my own household budget spreadsheets. It was a detailed file tracking grocery inflation. Column A had dates. Column B had product codes. Column C showed price shifts that looked like stock market fluctuations. A rushed thief would see numbers and scream foreign bank transfers. A forensic accountant would realize they were looking at the price of organic eggs. I hid a motion-activated camera on the bookcase. The lens faced the kitchen. I synced the feed to my phone. Meanwhile, Nia checked the forgery's notary stamp against the state digital registry. Every stamp has a unique code. Nia typed the 8-digit number from the fake document into the database. My phone chimed at 1:14 Wednesday afternoon. I was at the warehouse, reviewing a shipping schedule. The notification read, "Motion detected." I locked my door and opened the app. High-definition footage flickered on my screen. A figure stood on my patio. It was Rita. She wore a dark hoodie and sunglasses. But that stiff posture and the designer bag gave her away. She tested the door. I had left the latch loose. She wedged a tool into the track and forced it open. Rita stepped inside. moving with jerky, frantic energy. She never checked for cameras. She lunged for the manila folder. She ripped it open and glanced at the first page of my spreadsheet. Seeing endless rows of numbers, she snapped it shut. She stuffed it into her bag and bolted, leaving the door wide open. The break-in lasted 42 seconds. I saved the clip to a secure server. I didn't call the police yet. A simple burglary charge is nothing. I needed her to use those stolen files in court. I told her to get the evidence to her lawyer. She did. 2 days later, my cousin S. attorney filed an emergency motion. They demanded a full audit of my offshore assets. Convinced they had me, they actually attached my grocery budget as Exhibit A. In their rush to bury me, they handed the judge proof of a crime. Her own lawyer admitted in writing that his client broke into my home and stole documents. Rita thought she won. Instead, she confessed to burglary and tried to use egg prices to prove fraud that night. Nia walked in with a document from the state notary database. She looked serious. She dropped the paper over the video of Rita raiding my place. Nia pointed at the seal on the forged amendment. The registry linked that number to a woman named Patricia Vance. I knew her. Patricia was my Auntess bridge partner. But Nia delivered the final blow. Patricia's notary license had expired 2 years ago. The state pulled it. That seal was a total fake. Rita had forged both the signature and the stamp. The room felt freezing. We had video of the break-in and proof that her legal filing was a complete fraud. Our defense was rock solid. We were ready to crush her case, but her lawyer, still clueless, was already cooking up a new scheme. He figured the money angle was too slow, so he attacked the trust itself. He claimed my grandmother lacked the mental capacity to sign the papers. Hoping to void my inheritance, he prepared to demand medical records, totally unaware that my grandmother had outplayed him years ago. Her attorney realized he had hit a wall. He had submitted a stolen grocery list to a judge, thinking it was a ledger of wire transfers. When he saw those numbers were just milk and eggs, he panicked. Submitting stolen files to a judge is a fast track to losing a law license. He needed to drop the burglary angle and pivot. If he could prove my grandmother was mentally unfit, he could collapse the whole trust. Friday afternoon, our lawyer forwarded the new motion. It was filled with medical jargon, but the claim was simple. Rita insisted my grandmother had dementia and that I had coerced her. Rita banked on the fact that she hadn't seen our grandmother in 3 years. She mistook my grandmother S.'s quiet nature for confusion. She didn't realize that silence was a strategic weapon. I was the one at every doctor visit. I handled the traffic, the waits, and the insurance headaches while Rita lived on credit. I knew exactly what was in those files. My grandmother prepared for every scenario. She knew vultures like Rita would attack her sanity. She didn't trust word of mouth. She hired a top neurologist in Salt Lake City named Dr. Thorne. My lawyer didn't waste time. He subpoenaed Dr. Thorne's clinic for 5 years of records. The files arrived by courier the following Tuesday. I sat with Nia as we pored over the charts. Nia loves cold, hard facts, and even she was impressed. The files showed a rigorous testing schedule every 6 months. My grandmother underwent deep cognitive evaluations. The scores were perfect. She consistently landed in the 99th percentile. Her mind was sharper than people half her age. She was brilliant. The data destroyed their case, but the last page of the file was the real killer. It was a transcript from a private consult 2 weeks before the trust was finalized. In Utah, to form a trust, you must prove you understand your assets and your intent. The doctor had grilled my grandmother to ensure she was sound. I read the words on the page. My grandmother told the doctor everything. She knew Rita was stealing from her and acting like she was senile. She said she was building a fortress to protect me. She knew exactly what Rita would do once she was gone. Nia let out a breath and put the paper down. That one paragraph obliterated their strategy. My grandmother wasn't confused. She was playing chess while Rita was playing with matches. The dementia claim was dead on arrival. Rita had wasted her lawyer's time and drained her mother's money for nothing. The walls were closing in. The legal bills were mounting, and my aunt was feeling the heat of that second mortgage. Her polished act was cracking. I saw the fallout 2 days later. I was at the grocery store, just putting my items on the belt. The store was quiet until I heard the rapid, frantic clicking of heels behind me. Aunt Brenda rushed up. She looked wrecked, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her clothes were a mess. She didn't scream, she just started sobbing. It was pure, pathetic panic. She grabbed my arm and begged me to stop, saying I was tearing the family apart. She told me to drop the trust and just share the money before the lawyers took it all. She talked about blood being thicker than water. I just stared. A year ago, I might have felt guilty. But I held the ledger and video proof of her daughter breaking into my place. I knew Brenda had funded this abuse for years, happy to ignore it as long as the cash kept rolling in. She wasn't crying for the family. She was crying because she was finally losing. I didn't say a word. I tapped my card at the register, watching for approval. I bagged my groceries, moving slow and steady. Lifting the bags, I faced my aunt. I locked eyes with Sarah and laid it out, cold and clear. "The bank is seizing the lake house Tuesday, Sarah," I said, voice flat. "Foreclosure is final. Pack your things." Her total collapse in that grocery aisle confirmed exactly what Mark and I suspected. The funds Rita used to fuel her legal war were crumbling under a mountain of debt. The second mortgage Sarah took wasn't some endless gold mine, it was a dying resource. Drained by every hour her pricey attorney spent on garbage court motions, the fake mental health claim failed. The offshore account lies just handed us proof of perjury. Rita was out of moves, but the trust freeze held. I went home and updated our strategy boards. We needed one knockout punch for the judge. We had to smash the forged trust amendment so hard that lifting the injunction became their only option. Mark sat at the island, studying a high-res scan of the forged papers. A highlighter cap was stuck in his teeth. He was locked on the blue notary seal at the bottom of page 2. He already knew the commission number belonged to a retired agent. But Mark is an auditor who lives for the fine print. He wanted the mechanics of the lie. "Sarah," he said, voice sharp against the fridge hum. "Come see this." I walked over. Leaning against the counter, Mark pulled the cap out and pointed to the ink ridges on the stamp. "Official seals use a press or a pad." Mark explained the pressure should be even, creating a crisp mark. "Look at the right side of this circle. See how the ink smears and thickens." I squinted at the blue mark. He was right. The right side was soaked in ink, while the left looked faded. "That is uneven pressure," Mark noted. "Happens when you use a dry stamp and mash it down, desperate to get the last bit of ink on the page." That notary was a pro. She processed hundreds of files. She never would have left a mess like this. This stamp was neglected. It sat for years before someone forced it onto this paper. It hit me. "That notary did not stamp this," I said. "Exactly." Mark agreed, eyes gleaming. "She gave up her license years ago, but she kept the physical stamp. She is Sarah's old bridge partner. They play cards every Thursday." "Where do they play?" "Sarah." "They switch houses," I said, mapping out the timeline. "But they always play at Sarah's place the first week of the month." Mark tapped the forged signature. Rita did not hire a corrupt pro to sign this. She found that old stamp in a junk drawer at her mother's place. She stole it. She stamped it herself. "Sarah, she did not just forge your grandmother's name. She forged a state notary seal. That turns a civil dispute into a serious felony." The weight of Mark's find changed our entire battle. We were not just protecting my inheritance from a greedy relative anymore. We had proof of a major crime. Taking this to the judge would ruin Rita. She could face prison time, but a blurry stamp is just a start. A clever defense lawyer might claim the notary stamped it years ago as a favor, and the date was filled in later. We needed an undeniable anchor. We had to prove my grandmother could not have signed that paper on the date Rita claimed. I turned from the counter to the stack of cardboard boxes from the cabin. They held years of receipts, tax forms, and property records. Paper trails never lie. I dragged the heaviest box into the living room and sliced the tape. "What are you looking for?" Leo asked, walking in with the mail. "An alibi," I said. The forged trust amendment was dated October 14th. Rita claimed Grandma signed it in the living room of the city house that Tuesday. If I could find a receipt, a toll record, or a card statement placing Grandma somewhere else that day, Rita's story would fall apart. I dug through files for 2 hours. Bank records, bills, invoices. Grandma was obsessed with saving receipts. She bundled them by month with rubber bands. I found the October bundle from last year. I pulled the band off and started checking the thermal paper slips. I found grocery receipts, pharmacy slips. Then I pulled a small, thick, pale yellow rectangle. I stared at the black ink. The top said the Alpine Bakery, a local spot famous for lemon tarts. I remembered that day perfectly. The bakery was not in the city. It was in a mountain town 200 miles south of the valley. Grandma loved their tarts. I took a day off from the warehouse to drive her down the canyon. We spent the afternoon in the courtyard, drinking coffee and eating pastries. I looked at the date on the yellow receipt, October 14th. I looked at the time, 2:15 p.m. I held the slip between my thumb and finger. I turned to Mark and Leo. "Grandma was not in the city living room on the afternoon of October 14th, I said, voice steady. "She was 200 miles away eating a tart, and I paid for it with my card. I have the statement." Mark whistled. "The trap is set," he said. "We have the stolen stamp, the double forgery, and an ironclad alibi proving she was nowhere near that room. Rita's lawyer is walking into a massacre." Leo looked at the receipt, his nerves turned into cold resolve. "When do we show the judge?" he asked. "When does this end?" "Not yet," I said, sliding the receipt into a plastic sleeve. "We let Rita walk into her deposition next week. We let her sit across from Thomas Gable and lie under oath about watching Grandma sign that paper. We let her lock her lies into the official record. We give her the rope to hang herself. Our room was ready. The strategy boards mapped an inevitable path to her defeat. She was blind to the fortress we built. She thought she was beating a simple warehouse manager. She had no clue she was walking into a calculated ambush. The deposition was set for Tuesday morning, and I planned to watch her burn her empire down. Tuesday arrived with grey skies and freezing rain. We met in the sterile office on the 14th floor. It was 10 a.m. The long mahogany table felt like a battlefield. I sat across from Gable. Rita sat opposite, flanked by her pricey lawyer. She wore a tailored cream blazer and a silk scarf. I knew from Sarah's gossip that she bought the outfit on a high-interest card just for this. She wanted to look like an heiress defending a legacy, polished, confident, like a woman who had never faced a consequence in her 33 years. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, fingers poised over her machine. The recording light glowed steady. The oath was given. Rita swore to tell the truth. It takes 3 seconds for a lie to cross a table. I was counting. Gable opened his binder, leaving the blue ledger behind. He ignored the receipt proving she was miles away. He didn't mention the notary was suspended. He held our best evidence back. A deposition isn't for surprises. It is for letting them hang themselves. Gable gave her enough rope. He started with a calm, steady rhythm, hitting the basic facts. He asked about her bond with Sarah Miller, then confirmed her current address. He slid a plastic sleeve across the table. Inside was a high-resolution copy of the fake trust amendment. Gable asked her to identify it. Rita smiled. She leaned in, claiming for the record it was her grandmother's final wish. Gable pressed for the details of its creation. Rita lied like a pro. She testified. She visited the old oak house on October 14th. She claimed her grandmother was feeling nostalgic about the estate. She swore she sat on the velvet sofa and watched the will being written. She swore she watched her sign it. I studied Rita's face under those harsh conference room lights. When we were kids, she used to steal cash from my piggy bank. When Mom asked, she would stare straight ahead and lie, but her left eye always betrayed her. An involuntary muscle spasm would twitch at the corner. It was a nervous tic she never outgrew. As she lied to the court reporter, that left eye started flickering. She was terrified under that fancy blazer. She knew it was a felony, but her greed won out. Gable let her ramble for 3 hours. He pinned her down on the time, the room, and even the pen colour used. He asked about the lighting and where the notary sat. He ensured her perjury was locked into the transcript, leaving no way out. Her lawyer sat there, nodding like he had already won. He thought Gable was lost. He figured we had no answer for a sworn witness. He crossed his arms, looking smug. After a break, Gable reached into his binder and pulled out a heavy manila folder. The folder marked offshore account routing, the fake file I had planted on my kitchen island. Gable slid it over. Rita straightened up. A hungry look sparked in her eyes. She thought this was the kill shot. She claimed it held proof of my shady finances. Gable steepled his fingers. He asked a simple, sharp question. How exactly did you get this folder, Rita? He didn't ask about the contents. He asked about the object itself. Her lawyer stiffened, but Rita kept digging her own grave. She testified that her grandmother handed her the folder during that fake October visit. She claimed she was told to keep it as proof of my mismanagement. She lied under oath about receiving stolen goods from a dead woman. She just confessed to burglary on the record. Gable didn't blink. He kept the security footage of her prying my patio door hidden. He just said, "Thanks for confirming the chain of custody." The stenographer hit the final key. Gable shut his binder. Her lawyer looked confused. He expected a fight over bank accounts. Instead, we just packed our bags. We wrapped at 1:15. Rita stood up, smoothed her blazer, and looked at me, triumphant. She thought she outsmarted a top lawyer and her own cousin. She expected the trust funds to hit her account soon. I said nothing. I grabbed my coat and left. I took the elevator down to the city streets. The rain was washing the grime away. The cold air felt sharp. I stood under the awning watching Rita head to her car. Her lawyer held an umbrella over her. She was laughing. She thought she had won. She had no clue she just trapped herself with perjury, evidence tampering, and clear-cut burglary. Her own words were the final nails in her coffin. We had the transcript, the receipt, and the footage. The trap was perfect. I drove home to meet Nia. I handed over my notes. She gave me a sharp smile. The perjury was set. We won the legal war before the judge even saw the file. While Rita celebrated her imaginary win, her actual world was collapsing. She wasted months and borrowed cash on this lawsuit, ignoring the ticking bomb at the house. Her 30 days were up. The balloon mortgage was due. And the bank was finished with polite letters. Reality was arriving. Rita left the building on a cloud of fake confidence, playing queen for 48 more hours. She ignored the mail piling up on her porch. Logistics don't care about lawsuits. When a mortgage hits maturity, banks don't care about probate. The bank follows the contract. The grace period ended Thursday at midnight. By Friday morning, foreclosure was a hard reality. Rita stayed oblivious. She decided Friday was the perfect day to live stream a house tour for her fans. Leo watched the feed from our war room. Rita walked through the living room in a robe, holding coffee. She pointed out the moulding and the fireplace. Talking about tearing out cabinets for an open-concept kitchen, she spoke like she had endless cash. Then the doorbell rang, twice, sharp and loud. Rita laughed, joking about a delivery. She walked to the heavy front door and pulled it open, phone still in her hand. The camera caught a man on the porch in a grey suit, holding a stack of envelopes. "Are you Rita Caldwell?" he asked. She adjusted her robe and said yes. The man handed her the papers. "You have been served," he said flatly. He walked back to his car. Rita lowered the phone, but the live stream kept running, showing a shaky view of the floor. She tore open the top envelope and brought it into frame. The header was clear in bold ink. Notice of default and foreclosure, notice to vacate. The bank was taking the house. Her followers watched the reality of her life shatter in real time. The phone hit the floor with a loud crack, and the feed died. Aunt Sharon watched the broadcast from her townhouse. Sharon measured her value by net worth and social status, and she raised Chloe to mirror those shallow priorities. Sharon even took out a second mortgage on her home to fund the legal war, certain the stolen trust funds would pay her back. As the feed cut to black, panic set in. Sharon checked her bank portal, stomach churning. That high-end litigation lawyer demanded huge retainers, charging hundreds of dollars an hour just to send emails and draft useless motions. Sharon stared at her screen, shaking. The $100,000 she pulled from her home equity was gone. Her balance was basically zero. She had nuked her retirement to fight for an estate the bank had just seized. Chloe was homeless and Sharon was dead broke. Their fake empire had collapsed, leaving a mountain of toxic debt. While they spiraled, Thomas Gable launched our final move. Friday afternoon is a dead zone for lawyers. Everyone is just trying to clear their desk. Gable timed it perfectly. He sent a digital file to Chloe's lawyer at exactly 3 o'clock. The subject line read, "Respondent Discovery Production." Expecting standard financial updates, the lawyer opened the folder. Instead, he found a collection of devastating evidence. The first file was a high-resolution scan of the folder Chloe had stolen from my kitchen. Gable included every page of that 40-page spreadsheet. The lawyer zoomed in on the numbers and headers. He suddenly realized the complex offshore banking data he had filed with the judge was actually a basic grocery budget. He realized his client had committed burglary and handed him the evidence. The terror of potential disbarment hit him hard. Next, he opened the state registry record for the notary. He saw the red text marking the commission as suspended. Then looked at the forged trust amendment on his desk. He checked the identification numbers. He realized the legal document he used to freeze the trust was a double forgery featuring a fake state seal. Then, he opened the medical file from Dr. Thorne. He read the cognitive evaluations and the transcript where Evelyn detailed her plan to stop Chloe's theft. The dementia claim he had drafted was now a proven lie. Chloe's attorney was a man who valued his bar license way more than any client. He saw the trap instantly, then reviewed the transcript from Tuesday. He read the testimony where Chloe swore she watched Evelyn sign the amendment in Utah. Then he opened Gable's fourth attachment, a bakery receipt proving Evelyn was 200 miles away, buying a lemon tart when the signing supposedly happened. The attorney grabbed his phone and dialed Chloe. He didn't ask about the broadcast or the foreclosure. He spoke with the freezing, precise tone of a man who realized he had been played into committing malpractice. "You lied to me," he snapped. "You handed me stolen property. You forged a notary seal. You committed perjury on my watch." Chloe tried to interrupt, but he shut her down. "I am filing a motion to withdraw as your counsel. First thing Monday," he stated. "I am citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts. You fabricated evidence. You have exposed my firm to serious sanctions. Do not call this office again." He hung up. Chloe stood in the foyer of a foreclosed house with an eviction notice in hand. Her mother was broke. Her lawyer had quit. The trust was still locked tight. Every scheme she tried to pull had snapped shut like a trap. She had no leverage left. She was a general without an army on a battlefield she didn't understand. The extortion, the forgery, the smears, everything had failed. The probate hearing was only days away. Chloe was out of time. She had to face a judge who now had every piece of proof regarding her crimes. I packed my bags in the war room, staring at the whiteboards, tracking her demise. We had blocked every exit. I was ready to walk into court and finish this. The 3rd District Courthouse in Salt Lake City is all heavy granite and echoing marble. Tuesday morning was freezing. I walked through security at 9:45 with Nia and Leo. We didn't talk. We moved with the precision of a team about to execute a final plan. Thomas Gable met us at the checkpoint with one slim leather briefcase. No heavy boxes of filler this time, just a curated collection of lethal evidence. We entered the courtroom and took our seats. Judge Harmon was on the bench. Harmon used to be a tax litigator, and he was known for being cold, procedural, and having zero patience for drama. His courtroom ran like a Swiss watch. Chloe arrived 3 minutes before the bailiff started the session, walking down the aisle alone. She wore the same cream blazer from the deposition, but it looked rumpled and the scarf was gone. That arrogant confidence was totally gone. She sat at the petitioner's table, isolated. Her former lawyer walked in a moment later. He didn't even look at her. He went straight to the podium. When the judge called the case, the attorney cleared his throat, stated his name for the record, and immediately filed a motion to withdraw. He cited irreconcilable ethical conflicts, ending his representation of the petitioner. Chloe reached out, grabbing his sleeve and whispering. He pulled his arm away without even glancing down. Harmon looked over his glasses at the lawyer. Then at the discovery packet Gable had filed over the weekend, the judge understood exactly what those ethical conflicts meant. An officer of the court had just realized his client was feeding him fake evidence. Harmon nodded and granted the motion instantly. The attorney packed his things and walked out without looking back. Chloe sat alone at the big oak table, staring at a judge who had already read every page of her crimes. Harmon told Chloe she had the right to request a delay to find a new lawyer. She refused. She still believed her forged document was strong enough to win. She assumed being the granddaughter would save her. She told the judge to proceed. The hearing moved fast. Gable stood up. He skipped the dramatic speeches about family or morality. He treated the court like a boardroom, laying out sequential data points to prove a structural failure. He submitted the registry printout as Exhibit A. He showed that the notary commission expired 2 years before the amendment was supposedly stamped. He explained how that invalid seal made the signature legally void. Then he submitted the bakery receipt as Exhibit B, placing Evelyn 200 miles away on the afternoon of October 14th. He pointed at the receipt, proving my grandmother bought a tart while Chloe was allegedly signing papers. He filed Dr. Thorne S. notes, showing Evelyn was sharp and Chloe was a thief. Then, Gable entered the blue ledger as evidence. He proved Chloe forged the amendment not just for cash, but to lock down the estate before anyone caught her 4 years of elder financial abuse. Sarah tried to jump in, but the receipt killed her claim when she insisted Evelyn drove to Denver that night. Gable just tapped the timestamp. That 4-hour drive made her timeline impossible. The trap snapped. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. Gable didn't even need the rest of the file. The fake notary seal and the geography destroyed her. Rita knew it. The facts were set in stone. She switched to a pathetic performance of raw victimhood. Sobbing, she begged the judge to see her as a grieving granddaughter targeted by a bully. She claimed she only wanted to honour Evelyn. Judge Harmon didn't offer a tissue. He didn't even blink. He slammed his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He stared her down and delivered the final ruling. "Forgery is a precise crime," he said, cold. He looked at me, noting our proof. "Paper is patient, Miss Kelly. The court is not." Harmon struck down the forged amendment with prejudice. Rita was finished. He released the trust funds, giving me back full control. The war was over. We walked out into the silent marble hallway. Nia and Leo were right behind me. Rita stumbled out, her 30-year mask finally shattered, face flushed. Hands shaking, she blocked our path. "This is not fair," she screamed. "You manipulated her. You stole my life. She was mine. You were just the help." I looked at my cousin, feeling nothing. No anger, no pity, just the calm of a balanced ledger. I looked her in the eye and kept my voice low. It was never about love, Rita. It was about logistics. You were just bad at math. I walked to the elevator, leaving her trembling. We stepped inside and the doors shut, leaving her on the 14th floor. The trust was safe. But the blue ledger had triggered a storm. The civil victory was just the start of a criminal case. The silence in the elevator felt different today. Gone was the fear from the will reading. This was the peace of a battle won. We stepped into the crisp air. The civil dispute was dead, but our evidence was just catching fire. Judge Harmon wasn't the type to ignore elder financial abuse and a forged seal. He wasn't walking away. Bound by duty, Harmon wrote a referral detailing the perjury and theft. He sent the entire packet to the white-collar crime division. That blue ledger was still a weapon. It acted as both a shield against her fake dementia claims and a record of her greed. By the end, the court confirmed she had siphoned roughly $140,000 over 4 years. As the new trustee, I demanded the money back. Rita was dry, her accounts were empty, her credit was trashed, and her house was facing foreclosure. She had zero capital. When a debtor can't pay, the law finds other ways. Gable filed a writ of execution. The court authorized the seizure of her assets to pay back the estate. The execution was poetic. Rita built her life on luxury goods and social media clout, all bought with my grandmother's money. She wore those labels like armor. 3 days later, sheriff deputies arrived with yellow tape. They didn't care about her digital aesthetic. They treated her designer goods like common commodities for an auction. Gable sent me the report later that week. Rows of Italian bags, designer shoes, and the emerald brooch she had stolen from Evelyn. They emptied her closet, tearing down the empire she had built on lies. The items didn't go to boutiques. They were taken to a fluorescent-lit auction house. Rita's pride was sold off on folding tables to the highest bidder. The auction proceeds filled the trust, covering the deficit. The status symbols she bought were now paying her debts. But the humiliations was just the start. The district attorney reviewed the judge's referral. Forging a notary seal is a serious felony. Perjury means prison. Prosecutors began the indictment. Rita needed a high-end criminal lawyer now, not a probate attorney. Elite lawyers don't work for free. Aunt Brenda saw the arrest coming. The ruin she courted by funding the Civil War was now eating her alive. Her home's second mortgage was draining her pension. Her social circle vanished as the news of the forgery spread. She was isolated, drowning in debt and desperate to keep her daughter out of a cage. Brenda was out of moves. She called friends, who turned her away. She tried banks, who rejected her. Cornered, she called the one person in the valley with actual cash. 2 a.m, I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing trust documents, planning to move the capital into high-yield assets. The apartment was quiet. My phone lit up the counter, vibrating against the stone. It was Aunt Brenda. I didn't answer. I let it ring into voicemail. I walked to the coffee maker, set my mug down, and pressed the button. The machine started grinding. A notification pinged. I hit speakerphone. Brenda was sobbing. No arrogance, just a ragged, desperate sound I had never heard from her before. "Josie, please," she begged. "Pick up. I know it's late. Rita is terrified. The prosecutor is coming. We need a lawyer, and I have nothing left." "I can't breathe," she choked out. "Yes, your cousin Josie. We re-family. You have the trust money. You won." Evelyn would want her own granddaughter in jail. "Just loan us the fee. I'll pay it back, I swear. Don't turn your back on us." I stood there, coffee in hand, listening. She was using my grandmother's name to buy guilt. She was preaching loyalty while ignoring 4 years of treating me like an ATM. They didn't care about family when Rita was stealing my cash. They only found their morals when they needed bail money. The line clicked dead. Silence filled the room. I felt nothing, no guilt, no desire to lecture. The ledger was balanced. I hit the trash icon and the file vanished. I sipped my coffee. Forgiveness is a choice, but access to me is a privilege. Have you ever had to cut off family? I woke up early. Sunlight hit the floor. I didn't reach for coffee. I walked to the whiteboards that had run my life for weeks. The battle was done. Time to clear the war room. I wiped away the timelines, the photos, the web of lies. I erased Rita's name. The wall was finally blank. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a manager getting back to business. I met the Gables at 10. We weren't there to fight, we were there to build. Evelyn didn't fight for years just to let her money rot. Gable handed me the forms. $4.2 million was sitting in dead, stagnant bonds. I signed the paperwork to kill those old investments. Naya checked the routing numbers like an architect. We shifted the capital into high-yield tech funds and stable real estate. We were building something that could actually grow. I watched the numbers move on the screen. Everything clicked into place. My grandmother had the vision, but I had the logistics. I turned her legacies into an engine that would compound for decades. Wealth secured. I moved to the last detail. The bank had seized everything from the Elm Street house, including the vintage car collection Rita had used for her schemes. They were auctioning them off. I drove to the impound lot on a Tuesday. Under a grey sky, row after row of seized cars waited to be sold. I only wanted one, a sapphire blue 1968 coupe. Evelyn loved that car, and thanks to a velvet box in a hidden drawer. I had the original ignition key. Rita never found the key, which made her ownership worthless. I stood in the warehouse with my paddle. The room was packed with dealers and collectors. When the coupe came up, the bidding went high. I waited until the room went quiet, then dropped a bid that ended the game. It was a drop in the bucket for my new portfolio. I paid the bill and got the title. I walked out to the lot. The blue paint caught the flat grey light. I slid the silver key into the lock and turned it. The engine roared to life. It sounded perfect. I shifted into gear and left the lot. I didn't head home. I pointed the car toward the mountains. The cemetery sits high above the valley. I parked along the path. The air was freezing, smelling of frost and pines. I walked out onto the grass. Her headstone was simple granite. No flowers, those just wither. I brought a status report. I stood in the cold and whispered, "The books are balanced. The assets are growing. The debt is gone." I thought back on the hell of the last few months, the rumours, the forgery, and my cousin's pathetic threats. Zero guilt. Society claims family is an unbreakable bond. That is a lie. Walking away wasn't cruel. Refusing to fund their corruption was an act of survival. My grandmother saw the rot years ago. She gave me the exit plan I needed to save myself. She taught me to prune the sick branches to save the tree. I touched the cold car hood. The war was over. I was ready to build something lasting. I intended to use this wealth to help others, just as she wanted, but as I planned for the future. The final blow from my cousin S. downfall was already approaching. 6 months flew by. The winter ice melted into a crisp spring. The seasons shifted, and the legal system kept grinding forward. The district attorney didn't offer my cousin a deal. With a signed confession and proof of a forged government seal, you don't negotiate. You prosecute. A grand jury indicted Sarah on a Tuesday for felony forgery, perjury, and financial abuse. Since civil forfeiture had already liquidated her jewellery and luxury cars, Sarah had zero cash left for a lawyer. She faced the judge with a public defender. The trial was set for late autumn, drowning in legal fees and having lost her inheritance. Sarah filed for bankruptcy. She ditched her rental and vanished. The upscale parties moved on without her. Her social media went dark. The people who once praised her lifestyle forgot her name in weeks. She was a ghost. With the threat gone, I focused on building something new. The Living Trust performed just as we planned. The high-yield portfolio paid out solid quarterly dividends. I didn't touch the principal. I had the wealth management team funnel a percentage of the interest into a new non-profit entity. I called it the Caldwell Foundation. We leased a storefront in an underserved neighbourhood. It wasn't your typical charity. It was a training ground for local teenage girls, teaching them high-level literacy and supply chain logistics. We taught them how to master spreadsheet software, audit inventory, and decode complex legal contracts. We gave them the analytical tools to build their own fortresses. My grandmother always said, logistics was the art of putting things exactly where they belong. The foundation gave the next generation the skills to claim their own space, while it grew. My daily life stayed anchored in the familiar pace of the distribution hub. I kept my role as a supply chain manager. I loved the grit of the warehouse, the roar of diesel, the manifests, and the steady flow of goods keep me balanced. It was a Thursday in May. Our facility was expanding to handle a new shipping contract. Human resources needed an extra coordinator to manage the spike in driver manifests. They scheduled 3 interviews for my morning block. 3 resumes sat on my desk by 8. I prefer interviewing without knowing names or backgrounds first. I judge candidates on how they handle themselves in the moment. At 11, the glass door swung open. The final candidate walked in. It was Aunt Brenda. I sat behind my desk and watched her. The change was shocking. The arrogance she wore at the grocery store was gone. She was wearing a cheap grey suit from a discount bin. Her posture was broken. The second mortgage she took out for Sarah S. legal bills had ruined her. The bank took her house. Now she needed an entry-level salary just to afford a tiny apartment. She was living the harsh reality she used to mock. Brenda looked up from her folder. Our eyes met. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ghost white. She locked up. Her knuckles went pale as she gripped her imitation leather purse. She realized the manager she once called a parasite was the one holding her future. I didn't smile. I didn't frown either. I kept my face blank. I pointed to the chair across from me. "Please take a seat, Brenda." My voice was level. She moved with stiff, clumsy steps. Her hands were shaking as she tucked her purse away. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat. She looked around at my office, taking in the logistics certifications and workflow charts. I opened her application and scanned the pages. I noticed the 20-year gap in her work history. She had spent decades living off her late husband's pension and borrowed money. She had 0 experience with modern software or tracking systems. Her resume was a desert. I closed the folder and folded my hands on the desk, lining up my fingers with perfect symmetry. I stared right into her eyes. The silence was loud, filled only by the hum of a forklift outside. I delivered my verdict with cold, professional courtesy. Your work history has some serious gaps, Brenda. This coordinator role requires strict data verification and real administrative oversight. We rely on past performance to ensure we don't have errors. Unfortunately, I have to pass on your application due to a lack of verifiable references. Brenda stared at me. She got the message. There was no yelling, no begging. The books were closed, and the request was denied. The war was over. This was just the permanent aftermath. She stood up, said nothing, and walked out of the glass office. I watched her cross the concrete warehouse floor toward the exit. I opened my email and prepped for the afternoon. Friday evening brought a warm breeze off the canyons. I drove up the mountain road, leaving the city behind. I had bought a small log cabin higher up. It was smaller than the old estate, but it was all mine. The deed was clean, no hidden debt, no toxic history. I sat on the front porch, breathing in the scent of pine. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in deep shades of purple. Leo was by the patio, turning vegetables on the grill. Smoke drifted into the air. Mia sat in a folding chair, reading a legal thriller with her glasses on the tip of her nose. I rested my laptop on the patio table. The screen glowed in the twilight. I was updating a spreadsheet for the foundation. Column A tracked the incoming resources. Column B tracked the outgoing costs. Every digit fit perfectly into its cell. The columns lined up, mapping out a life of stability. I listened to the wind in the trees. I thought about the forged documents, the threats, and the loud, arrogant lies that used to haunt me. Those noises were dead, silenced by the truth. Real victory doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a spotlight. It is just the quiet, undeniable peace of a life well lived. There is a quiet tragedy that plays out in homes across this country every single day. It rarely starts with a judge's gavel or a sudden foreclosure. It starts soft. It starts with a $50 bill stolen from a purse on a random Tuesday. It starts with a mother who sees the theft, turns her head, and picks the easy path of silence over the hard work of parenting, looking back at the wreckage of that conflict. The forged papers and the broken families, it is easy to call it a legal thriller or a money fight. But beneath the trust funds and the real estate is a mirror reflecting the reality of modern parenting, family duty, and our culture. We raise our children to do more than just survive. We want them to carry a legacy of honesty and grit. Parenting is rarely about physical comfort. It is the hard, painful duty of forcing your child to face their own flaws. Sarah ignored her daughter, Chloe's small lies early on. Sarah thought she was protecting the girl from a harsh world, but shielding a child from consequences is no protection. It is a slow betrayal. When you erase every rough edge, you do not raise a resilient adult. You cultivate an entitled person destined for ruin. Chloe grew up thinking rules were mere suggestions that did not apply to her. She learned from her mother's blindness that she could take whatever she wanted without paying the price. This failure reveals a major flaw in how we view responsibility today. We live in an era where fake digital wealth hides the reality of hard work. Chloe embodies a culture hooked on the superficial. She is part of a generation living for social media clout and designer bags bought on credit. The fancy champagne meant for an online audience, the grand, historic houses used as props for a curated image. Yet, Chloe wanted the crown without the kingdom's weight. She jumped at the chance to inherit a massive estate. Blinded by greed to the crushing debts and tax liens attached to it, it is a vital lesson for every parent. You cannot separate ownership from management. A true inheritance is not just money. It is a transfer of duty. If we fail to teach our kids how to handle responsibility, any asset we hand them will become an anchor that drags them down. The real tragedy here is Clara. In a desperate, misguided bid to shield Jessica from the fallout of her own fraud, Clara mortgaged her house for a high-priced legal team. She torched her retirement, her stability, her peace. Clara ended up dead broke, working bottom-tier jobs in her sunset years. It is a dangerous lie that parents must sacrifice everything for their kids, even their own future and their conscience. But blind sacrifice isn't noble when it just funds a scam. Good parenting means knowing where your role ends and your child's accountability starts. It takes guts to close your bank account and let a grown kid stumble so they finally learn to stand. Against this background of enabling, Elena's journey shows how to build real wisdom and grit. Elena didn't win through screaming matches. She won by drafting a rock-solid plan. As her grandmother, June, used to say, common sense is just putting things where they belong. To win, look at the world through facts, not the blurry lens of emotion. Wisdom is reading the fine print before you sign. It is seeing past a shiny cover to find the real cost. More than that, Elena's success proves the power of a documented life. In a world where truth is warped by con artists, your daily integrity is your best armor. Honesty isn't just a moral ideal, it is a practical shield against the chaos. Willpower isn't always about fighting back with your fists. Sometimes it is the strength to stay quiet when falsely accused. It is the patience to build a record of truth while your enemies wear themselves thin. Real victory isn't found in loud boasting or empty likes. It is found in the quiet peace of an honest, well-planned life. It is the hum of a reliable engine, a balanced budget, and the serenity of a quiet night, knowing you owe nothing and your conscience is clean. If this story hit home, if you have ever had to build a wall of silence against the games of people who were supposed to love you, please subscribe and follow the channel Reality Check. We share these because real life is often much more instructive than fiction. We want to build a community that gets the value of boundaries, the weight of accountability, and the quiet triumph of walking away. As you turn off your screen and listen to the quiet in your own home, think about the invisible record you are writing today. Think about the small, unspoken lessons you pass down and the limits you set. We are all building an inheritance, choice by choice. Look at the people sitting with you. Are you handing them the keys to a life they can handle, or are you starting a fire you cannot put out? The answer is already there in the fine print.